Hi there. My name's Mary. I'm the Director of Youth Services at the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And I'm here to continue reading Some Writer, The Story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet. It was published in 2016 by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And we are up to Chapter 11, The Trumpet of the Swan. In almost everyone's life, there is one event that changes the whole course of his existence. By the fall of 1968, Catherine was in poor health. Medical bills began piling up. Andy needed money. Even though Charlotte's Web had sold very well, when Andy signed the contract, he'd agreed to take only a portion of the sales each year. The rest of the earnings were being held by the publisher. Probably in a sock somewhere, he said. He decided to write another children's book. An article in the New York Times about trumpeter swans gave Andy an idea for a story about a trumpeter swan born without a voice. Andy named the character Louis, after the jazz trumpeter Louis Armstrong. He later wrote a young reader that, like the young swan Louis, he needed money. Andy had never seen or heard a trumpeter swan, but he learned there was a swan family living on Bird Lake at the Philadelphia Zoo. Since Philly was the home of his old friend Cush, who called Andy Ho and himself Hum, in October of 1968, Andy wrote him a letter. Dear Cush, how would you like to do some sleuthing for an aging fiction writer? I've never visited the zoo. What does Bird Lake look like? Is it pleasing, ugly, small, big? What? Are there any trumpeter swans in residence today? How many? And now a sudden switch. Nightclubs. In what general area of Philadelphia would one find a night spot? So, go forth, old friend. Case the gardens for me. Tell me how they smell, what they look like. Examine the swans on Bird Lake. Love, Ho. P.S. To prepare yourself for the preposterous task, you should probably bone up on nomenclature. A male swan is a cop. A female is a pen. A baby swan is a cygnet. But don't say, I told you. Before long, Cush sent Andy the results of his research and some photographs. Andy wrote back to Cush. The snapshots from Bird Lake are an inspiration to me, and I'm encouraged to go on. Andy did more research from Maine. In his story, the young cygnet, Louis, stays at the Ritz Hotel and orders 12 watercress sandwiches from room service. What would that have cost? Andy called a friend who worked near the Ritz to find out. Unlike what he'd done with his other two children's books, Andy did not set this story aside to see if it needed changes. November 17, 1969. Dear Ursula, this morning I sent off the manuscript to you by registered mail. It's called The Trumpet of the Swan, and it's about a cygnet that has a speech defect, along with other problems, including a money problem. If you think the book is promising, let me know. And if you think it's lousy, I'd like to know that too. The trumpeter swan largest of the American waterfowl, was once almost extinct, but has made a comeback. This book is about a young trumpeter. Yours, Andy. Ursula did like the story, and both she and Andy hoped Garth Williams would illustrate it. But Garth was living in Mexico and was too far away to create the art in time. Everyone was disappointed. When Andy heard the news, he wrote to Garth Williams, "I'm very sad tonight. I'm not entirely happy with the text of the book. I'm old and wordy, and the book seems to show it." Eventually, they chose the artist Edward Frascino. Meanwhile, Andy had an idea for a book cover. Not being an artist himself, he asked his neighbor Dorothy B. Hayes to do a watercolor sketch of a trumpeter swan pulling on a boy's shoelace. Andy gave her sketch to Frascino, who repainted the concept for the cover. When Andy's new book was released in 1970, everyone was eager to read it. The day Sam Beaver visited the Philadelphia Zoo was the turning point in his life. "Why'd you come here?" asked the head man. "To defend freedom," replied Sam. "I heard you intended to clip the wing of a swan. I'm here to ask you not to do it." Sam sat down. They talked for a whole hour. Sam assured the head man that Louis was an old friend. He told about discovering the swan's nest almost 3 years ago in Canada, about how Louis came into the world lacking a voice, about Louis attending school in Montana and learning to read and write, about the theft of the trumpeter by Louis's father, the old Cobb, and about Camp Kooskoos and the swan boat in Boston. The head man listened with great attention, but he wasn't sure he believed a word of this strange tale. From The Trumpet of the Swan, date 1970. The reviews of The Trumpet of the Swan came in strong. When a group of young students wrote to Andy to ask about the violence in the book, he wrote back, "I go by my instinct. I write largely for myself, and am content to believe what's good enough for me is good enough for a youngster." Charlotte was a story of friendship, life, death, salvation. Stuart Little was a story of a quest, the quest for beauty. And this story, he later wrote, was a love story. Not just the love between Louis and his new wife, Serena, but between fathers and sons. Sam Beaver and his dad, Louis, and the old Cobb. Andy even noted at one point that the old Cobb spoke to Louis in the unmistakable voice of Andy's own father, Samuel White. Andy wrote, "Father was quite a talker. Didn't hesitate to say in 20 words what could be said in 6. Welcome to the pond and the swamp adjacent. Welcome to the world that contains this lovely pond, this splendid marsh, unspoiled and wild. Welcome to sunlight and shadow, wind and weather. Welcome to water. Welcome to danger, which you must guard against. The vile fox, the offensive otter, the stinking skunk. Beware of lead pellets that lie on the bottom of all ponds, left there by the guns of hunters. Don't eat them. They'll poison you. Be vigilant. Be strong. Be brave. Be graceful. and always follow me. From The Trumpeter of the Swan. Date 1970. In his review of The Trumpet of the Swan, the author John Updike wrote, "The world of E.B. White's children's books is eminently a reasonable one. When the director of Camp Kookooskoos is sprayed by a skunk, he announces that the camp has been given a delicious dash of wild perfume. Similarly, in Stuart Little, when a mouse, instead of a baby, is born to human parents, they promptly improvise for him a tiny bed out of 4 clothespins and a cigarette box. When, in Charlotte's Web, the pig squeals, 'I don't want to die,' the spider says, 'I can't stand hysterics.' The trumpet of the swan glows with the primal ecstasies of space and flight, of night and day, of nurturing and maturing, of courtship and art. On the last page, Louis thinks of how lucky he was to inhabit such a beautiful earth, how lucky he had been to solve his problems with music. How rare that word lucky has become. The universe remains chancy, but no one admits to having good luck. We and our children are lucky to have this book." Later, the Philadelphia Orchestra set The Trumpet of the Swan to music. "Imagine me," wrote White, "sitting down there in my boathouse a year and a half ago, composing the lines of Sam Beaver's poem and not having the slightest inkling that the Philadelphia Orchestra was tuning up on stage. What a life I lead! How merry! How innocent! How nutty!" Sam Beaver's poem. Of all the places on land and sea, Philadelphia Zoo is the place for me. There's plenty to eat and a lot to do. There's a frigate bird and a tiny shrew. There's a Vesper rat and a 2-toed sloth, and it's fair to say that I like them both. The houses are clean, the keepers are kind, and one baboon has a pink behind. From The Trumpet of the Swan, date 1970. What do our hearts treasure? Old age is a special problem for me because I've never been able to shed the mental image I have of myself, a lad of about 19. As time went on, Andy wrote less. The Whites spent some winters in Florida, but living in Maine was anything but retirement for Andy and Catherine. In the spring, they planted gardens and tended to lambs, geese, chickens, and their broods. In the late summer, they cut firewood, hayed the fields. In the fall, they stored ripened pumpkins and stacked firewood for the winter. And then it was spring again, and there were newly hatched chickens to keep warm. And beyond the fields, sloping to Allen Cove, was Andy's small sloop, Fern. He wrote, "When I want some fun, I don't write, I go sailing." Joel now lived nearby with his own family. Andy once wrote that Joel's boat, Flounder, had launched 1,000 ships. Joel had become a naval architect and ran a boatyard, designing and building traditional wooden boats. He built boats with the same verve Andy brought to writing. Joel designed and built his dad a 20-foot sloop that he named Martha, after Andy's granddaughter, and he rigged it so Andy could sail it alone. In 1977, after a series of illnesses, Catherine died of heart failure. At her service, the family read Andy's poem, Natural History. Andy did not go. He was too distraught. Later, Andy planted an oak tree at her graveside. He wrote a friend, "I have lost the one thing that seemed to make any sense in my life, and I feel like a child lost at Coney Island." Life did go on. He spent his time doing chores around the barn, sailing, and playing with his grandchildren. Andy and New Yorker editor Dorothy Lobreno Guth finished a project he and Catherine had begun. Editing the tens of thousands of letters he had written over his lifetime for a new book, Letters of E.B. White. That collection was as close to an autobiography as Andy would get. In time, Andy gave up sailing, but not boating. For his 81st birthday, he borrowed a canoe and went back to Belgrade Lakes. He wrote, "The trip was a success. The weather smiled, and the canoe, which leaked only slightly, could have been called summer memories." When he returned home, he bought himself an old-time canoe, just like the one his dad had given him for his 11th birthday. He later wrote to a friend, "The year is only a few days old, but I'm already in my thoughts, careening toward summer and fall, awaiting the day when I can boost my canoe atop the car and set out for the lake." I'll be 85 in July. I'm still riding a bike, but have lost the sight in one eye, along with a lot of other losses. Last fall, I was tooling along on my 3-speed Raleigh when a coyote emerged from the woods and followed me. Now, I don't think he was anything but curious, but it was kind of spooky to have a wild animal tailing me. I was probably his first octogenarian on wheels, and he just wanted to get a good look at it. From Letters of E.B. White, date 1984. Because his eyesight was failing, Andy resigned from writing news breaks for the New Yorker in 1982. He had written more than 30,000 news breaks. Andy thanked William Shawn and the magazine for keeping him gainfully employed over such a long period of time. One day, after Andy went canoeing, he stumbled and hit his head. Later on, he complained he wasn't feeling right. He was never quite himself again. Doctors diagnosed him with dementia. Eventually, Andy was confined to his bed with round-the-clock help. During the last year of Andy's life, Joel visited every day. In his memoir, Let Me Finish, Andy's stepson, Roger Angel, writes, "Joel told me that in that long year, he'd read aloud to his father often, and discovered that he enjoyed listening to his own writings, though he wasn't always clear about who the author was. Sometimes he'd raise a hand and impatiently wave a passage away, not good enough. Other evenings, he'd listen to the end, almost at rest, and then ask again who'd written these words. "You did, Dad," Joel said. There was a pause, and Andy said, "Well, not bad." Indeed, E.B. White's writing is, as they say in Maine, the finest kind. So we will end our reading here today, and we'll be back tomorrow to finish Sun Rider, the story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet. And as I've said before, in this 200th birthday year of the state of Maine, it's a lot of fun to be reading a book about a Maine author and by a Maine author. And you may want to find this book once the library's open again, so you can pore over the photographs and the reproductions of the manuscripts and the illustrations. So, until next time, my name's Mary, and I'm from the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.